2023 was my biggest year for parks-related travel to date. When all was said and done, I had visited 18 different units of the national park system, as well as 27 different parks overall. My busiest month was August, with 8 different park visits, while there were only 3 months where I didn't visit any single park, not including like the state parks and city parks near me, because I visit those all the time. This list is all about my travels, and the breakdown is as follows. I visited 6 national parks, including 3 that I had never been to before, 3 national historical parks, 3 national historic sites, 3 national battlefields, 1 national battlefield park, 1 national military park, and Catoctin Mountain Park, which has its own weird administrative designation outside of the normal naming system. In addition, I visited 1 national wildlife refuge, 1 national forest, 2 state parks, again outside of my home state of South Carolina because I visit those all the time, 4 city parks, again outside of South Carolina, and 1 interstate bike trail. That adds up to 1.5 national parks per month and 2.25 parks overall per month in 2023. I'm going to break them all down for you here to show you the breadth and diversity of parks in the United States, as well as give you some tips for your own visits. My travels took me to remote backcountry wildernesses as well as bustling city centers. I visited historic sites and battlefields, beaches and mountains, swamps and deserts. Perhaps this list will inspire you to add one of these places to your own vacation itinerary, so feel free to leave any questions you may have in the comments. For this breakdown, we'll go month by month, starting with January 2023, and I'm also going to skip all of the parks that are not national park sites because it would just take way too long. Again, you can leave questions about those in the comments, and I will be happy to answer them for you. Let's get started.
The wild is calling you. You know what to do. So leave behind everything you fear.
Smile for the camera, new friends.
It'll be on National Park Hours. That's right.
There are few who make it up home. There'll be travelers who wander in the wilderness. With you they'll find refuge from the cold. Go your own way. Go your own way. And leave behind everything you fear.
I started off the year pretty slow, easing into my park adventures with a short weekend trip to Boston. Now, Boston is home to several national park sites, but because this trip was only for a weekend and we were really actually there to visit a friend, we only visited the Boston National Historical Park. My wife and I had actually visited this park before, but I needed to get that sweet Unigrid that I didn't get the first time, so we returned on this trip. My travel tip for Boston National Historical Park is just do the Freedom Trail. The park is pretty weird administratively speaking, and that the Park Service doesn't even administer that much actual land for this park. The park is really an amalgamation of sites along the Freedom Trail, interpreting the history of Boston, with the Park Service owning some locations, nonprofits owning others. There's educational material along the way, like signage to better help you understand what this park is protecting. So if you want to see this park, just do the Freedom Trail. And also, don't be afraid to do a tour either. I know lots of people don't want to feel touristy doing tours, but I love them and find them incredibly enlightening for places I don't have a natural familiarity with, especially historical parks. Alright, that's it for January. February didn't have any park visits, so we'll skip right over to March, where I hit 2 national park sites on my trip to New Orleans. Right off the bat, New Orleans is one of my favorite cities in the world. It's got so much life and character and energy just oozing out of every single crack. It's really awesome, and it's home to 2 national park sites. The first is the Jean Lafitte National Historical Park, which I have an entire video about. Administratively, it's another pretty weird one. It's kind of complicated. There's actually 6 discontiguous units spread out all across southern Louisiana for this park. 3 of them are dedicated to Acadian culture. One is the Chalmette Battlefield from the Battle of New Orleans during the War of 1812. One is just kind of like a general New Orleans history unit downtown. And the last one, the one that I visited, is the Barataria Preserve, about 30 minutes south of New Orleans proper. The Barataria Preserve protects a really nice example of a classic Louisiana bayou. It has some really eye-opening interpretive exhibits at the visitor center and provides over 26,000 acres of really nice recreational opportunities for locals and tourists alike. My tip for this park is don't skip out on the Barataria Visitor Center. The hiking is great in this park, and you can really get yourself immersed in the bayou, but the visitor center, despite being really small, has some really important exhibits that I think everyone should see. Now, I really enjoyed my time at Jean Lafitte, but I was blown away by the next New Orleans park that I visited, the New Orleans Jazz National Historical Park. This is another one I have a whole video about, but suffice it to say, it is one of the most unique national parks in America. As of right now, it still sits in my top 5 favorite national park sites. That's how much I love this park. But again, it's pretty different. Don't go there expecting to visit a building or a specific location. The park does have a small presence in the French Quarter, but what's so unique about it is it's not dedicated to preserving a place. It's really all about preserving an art form and a feeling and a culture. You're not going to get that by reading these standard interpretive signs or walking around in an old building. This is a park you have to feel, and if you're planning on visiting it, my tips are: 1, check out the Park Service's in-house jazz band. Yes, the Park Service has a jazz band. It's called the Arrowhead Jazz Band, and they perform at the Jazz Museum in partnership with other local jazz artists. It's one of the coolest things ever to see a park ranger from the National Park Service in uniform jamming out to jazz up on a stage. It blew my mind, really. They post the schedule online, so be sure to check it out ahead of time to plan out your visit. But my second tip is just immerse yourself in the culture of jazz in New Orleans. See and listen to as much of it as you can wherever you can. I recommend Frenchman Street. Shout out to the Spotted Cat. But yeah, just listen to as much jazz as you can in this city, and you'll start to understand what this park is protecting. Also, shout out to one of the best city parks in the country, Audubon Park. Check it out if you're there. All right, that concludes March, so let's jump into April with a single national park visit, Kennesaw Mountain National Battlefield Park outside of Atlanta. My reason for visiting this park actually has kind of a funny story attached to it. So my wife is a huge Taylor Swift fan, and last year the All-Conquering Eras Tour had a stop in Atlanta. So of course my wife was planning on going, but I was like, hey, there's a national park site there that we haven't visited before, because we actually did do MLK National Historical Park in downtown Atlanta the year before. So I said, I'll drive you and drop you off and pick you up at the concert, and we can go to Kennesaw Mountain beforehand. The terms of this arrangement were amenable to her, and so that's exactly what we did. We went to Kennesaw Mountain, did a short hike, and then I dropped the wife off at Taylor Swift, and I went to see John Wick 4. I also made a stop at the lovely Piedmont Park in downtown Atlanta, another great city park that I love, so shout out to that. But back to Kennesaw Mountain, what struck me about Kennesaw was how much it doubled as a recreational resource as well as a historical one. I actually found out later that Kennesaw Mountain National Battlefield Park is the most visited military-related park in the national park system, ahead of even places like Gettysburg and Antietam. That really hit home for me, the multifaceted nature of parks like this, and how they can just be different things for different people. My tip here, build in some time. I looked at the park beforehand and assumed we could see a good chunk of it in just the few short hours that we had, but between the visitor center exhibits and the extensive trail network, we didn't get to see nearly as much of it as I would have hoped. I'll definitely be returning, but yeah, for you, just build in some time if you want to see a good portion of the park. I'd recommend at least a full day. On to May, one of my busiest park months of the year. I visited 5 different national park properties over the course of 2 different trips. The first trip was up to northern Maryland, southern Pennsylvania for a couple of stories that I was telling. I stopped at Antietam National Battlefield on my way in, did a story in Gettysburg, and then visited the Eisenhower National Historic Site right next door the following day, and finished up with a visit to Catoctin Mountain Park the next morning on my way out of town. Kind of a quick turnaround on this trip, but I do have a few tips for you. 1, and this goes for most of the battlefields I've been to, bring a bike. These battlefields can be pretty spread out, and a lot of them have self-guided tours you can do to follow the action of the battle, like in the proper sequence as it would have happened. Instead of having to drive your car to each stop, park, get out, read the signs, get back in, and drive to the next stop only to do it all over again, just ride your bike. The tour routes, from what I saw, were pretty bike-friendly, although you do have to ride in mixed traffic, so keep that in mind based on your comfortability level on a bike. The routes themselves are super scenic and beautiful on these bucolic backcountry roads, and it will just make your experience much more fluid, not having to stop and get out a bunch. Plus, you get some fresh air and a workout. Also, don't sleep on Eisenhower National Historic Site. It's literally right next door to Gettysburg and way quieter, way less crowds, and another great historic resource to explore. For Catoctin, my tip is don't get abducted by the Secret Service. To finish out May, let's now move on to my first full national park visit of the year, because the very next week I turned right back around and hit the road again. This time to New River Gorge National Park and Preserve, America's newest national park. Loved it, just fell in love immediately. Really fascinating and unique land use history. I love a park that showcases the relationship between people and land, and the human history of this park is all over the place here at New River Gorge. The coal mines are, of course, now abandoned, but a lot of the infrastructure that supported them is still there, just sitting on the hillsides being reclaimed by nature. It's hauntingly beautiful. Also, this park rightly earns its moniker as an adventurer's paradise. There's a real diversity of things to do. Just at my short weekend trip, I hiked, rafted, and walked across a bridge over 800 feet in the air. Climbing is also big here, and there's a large concentration of mountain biking trails as well. Locals still use the preserve portion of this park for hunting and fishing, and you can tell it still carries over a lot of its feel as a national river before it garnered national park status. 2 quick tips. 1, get on the river. Go rafting. The river is the heart of this park and central to everything this park ever was, is, or will be. If you want to experience New River Gorge, get on the river. 2, visit some of the abandoned coal towns. I visited Nuttallburg, and it's still one of my favorite national park experiences to this day. Again, you can see firsthand the scars humans have left on this landscape and how decades of conservation are beginning to heal those wounds. That's it for May. Let's move to June, which had 2 national park visits. Both were pretty close to home for me, and in fact, when I visited Cowpens National Battlefield in South Carolina, it was a bit of a milestone for me. See, my home state is home to 7 different national park sites, and up until last year, I had visited 6 of them. Cowpens was the last on my list, a Revolutionary War site, and it was really cool to complete the MPS locations in my home state, even if I do revisit several of them frequently. I'll repeat my tip about bringing your bike. It's the best way to see this park. After Cowpens, the following week, I trotted just over the border into North Carolina to the Carl Sandburg Home National Historic Site, preserving the mountain estate of the late poet. I will admit to never having heard of Carl Sandburg before I visited his home, but loved visiting this park nonetheless. And also, this is why I'm grateful for park sites like this. If this place weren't in the national park system, I likely would have never heard of it. But because I love visiting national parks, and this place is a national park, I was exposed to something completely new and expanded my horizons as a student of American history and literature. My travel tip here is to do the home tour, which you have to reserve in advance, so jump on it early, and is only done in small groups due to the historic nature of the house. It's a $10 tour and it's guided, which was great for somebody like me who, again, didn't know a lot about Mr. Sandburg. The guide got to tell me all about it. There's also a whole agricultural area on the property, complete with a goat petting area, because Carl Sandburg's wife, Lillian, was a world-renowned goat breeder. In fact, the Park Service still manages a herd of genetically related goats to those that Lillian bred, and the interpretive materials here talk about the dairy and agricultural operation that the Sandburgs ran. I love parks like this because, again, they just expose me to so many things I would otherwise never have heard of. Also, check out Flat Rock Village Bakery in the nearby town of Flat Rock. Great food and baked goods. Okay, July was empty, so let's move on to my busiest park month of the year, August. August was a huge travel month for me, mostly because the wife and I attended weddings on back-to-back weeks in Montana and Alaska. We ended up spending about 3 weeks away from home and had some awesome park-related adventures. After the first wedding in Missoula, we headed out into the wilds of southwest Montana for a little mini road trip before our flight to Alaska. We started off with a visit to the Big Hole National Battlefield, the site of a battle between the Nez Perce tribe and the American government. It's also part of the Nez Perce National Historical Park and is one stop along the larger Nez Perce National Historic Trail. And I didn't get to see as much of this park as I would have liked. It was pouring down rain when we came through here, and we pretty much could only do the visitor center, which, don't get me wrong, has some great exhibits, and I learned a lot, and it provides a lot of important historical context that I otherwise would not have known, but I would have really liked to have gotten out onto the land here and felt a lot of that history for myself. I don't really have any tips for this park because, again, I didn't see a lot of it, but this will have to be a redo trip for me. Next up was a trip to the Grant Coors Ranch National Historic Site in Deer Lodge, Montana. I have a whole video about this park. It's super cool. It has a fascinating history, which I think encapsulates a lot of the broader historical trends we see throughout the history of the West. It's kind of like a microcosm of what happened across that region as a whole. As far as visiting it goes, I think a 3/4 to a full day is a good way to see and experience all this park has to offer. It is a working ranch, meaning the Park Service literally operates it as a working cattle ranch. This is a form of living history interpretation, where the Park Service operates it as a working cattle ranch to help you understand what life would have been like on this very ranch way back in the 19th century. My tips for visiting are, again, do the house tour. This one's free and it's guided, and you learn a lot about the history of the ranch. You get a lot out of these tours, and they really help you connect with the park on a deeper level. I also recommend talking to the historical reenactors. They have a blacksmith and a chuck wagon person, a chuck wagoneer. I don't know what you call them, but they were the person who cooked and took care of all the food on long cattle drives. Again, talking to these people really helps you learn more about what the park is about. You kind of get out what you put in with parks like this, so just talk to as many people as you can. Next up in August was a trip to the big one, Yellowstone. Now, I don't have time to do a full Yellowstone breakdown here. In fact, on this trip, I was only in the park for a few hours anyway for a meetup, and we really only explored the Mammoth Hot Springs area. However, this was my second trip to Yellowstone, and I do have some advice for you. Get off the road. Something like 90% of visitors to Yellowstone never go further than 1 mile from the road network. You can massively thin out the crowds at Yellowstone by just hiking a few miles off the road. After that, we left Montana and made our way to Alaska, where I had several park visits overall, but the first national park site I checked out was Wrangell St. Elias National Park, but only kind of. I definitely didn't have the Wrangell experience because we only stopped at the visitor center near Glen Allen, but we did do a short hike. I got to see the Copper River and the distant visages of Mount Wrangell and Mount Drum. It was cool, I liked it, but I'm fully aware that I need to return to Wrangell and do it properly if I want to actually experience this park. I mean, it is the largest national park in America, after all. So no tips there for you, unfortunately. Unless you're heading to Valdez, then by all means stop and see the visitor center. And that actually concludes my August adventures. As you can see, they were very wide-ranging. But in September, I was actually still in Alaska at the beginning of the month, and my final park adventure of the trip took place at Kenai Fjords National Park. This is a park that has massively grown on me since I first visited it in 2021, to the point where it's probably creeped into my top 5 national parks at this point. And a huge reason for that is the Harding Ice Field. I just did a whole video on this, but I'm not lying to you when I say that this is one of the most impressive things I've ever seen. The scale of this amount of ice does not come through on video at all, although I'm sure even then you can see how large it is. I could not stop thinking about ice while I was in this park, and how it truly helps to explain everything on this landscape. If you have any thoughts about why this park looks the way it does, the answer is ice. It's breathtaking, stunning, really. And I'll break my advice for this park into 2 prongs, because hiking the Harding Ice Field is certainly not for everyone. By all means, if you are physically capable of it and in shape enough to do it, do it. You won't regret it, I promise you. But I also know that not everyone is capable of it, and so my other recommendation would be to do one of the boat tours out into the fjords themselves. Get out onto the water. You're almost guaranteed to see a bunch of wildlife. The guides are super knowledgeable, so you get to learn something along the way, and you still get to see how much ice influences the entire geology and ecology of this landscape. Some tours even have kayaking options when you're out there on the water, if that's your thing. So just research what options are best for you, but definitely get out onto the water in this park. Moving on, still in September, but about as different an experience as you can get from Kenai, was Joshua Tree National Park, way out in the California desert. I spent about a week in this area, visited the park several times over a couple days, and made a whole video about the threats that Joshua trees are facing. Really fascinating landscape, geologically stunning, ecologically underrated. I was there at the end of September, remember? So it was definitely on the hotter side, but not crazy. The one day we had highs in the hundreds, we just did our visit at night. But I had a few days with highs in the low 90s, so not too bad. Just keep the weather in mind if you visit during the hotter months. My tips are: 1, night skies. Go into the park at night and just look up. Joshua Tree is a fantastic dark sky park, and I will never not feel like a little kid just peering into the vastness of space at nighttime. If you're interested in nighttime interpretive programs, the Sky's the Limit Observatory is the park's official nonprofit partner, and I can highly recommend them. We did one of their programs one night. My other tip, though, is the 49 Palms Oasis hike. It's 3 miles round trip, but again, be careful of the heat because if you go in the warmer months, it's all uphill on the way back out. If you can swing it though, if you're in shape enough, definitely go check out the Oasis. You're hiking through this just total moonscape, just complete barren rocky desert, and then bam, all of a sudden you've got this oasis of palm trees in the middle of nowhere. I had never seen an oasis before. I think a lot of my perception of them was colored by movies and TV, but I was not prepared for how cool this thing was. There are actually several oases in the park, but this is the one we did, so it's the one I'm recommending to you. But check out any of the oases. They're probably going to be all really awesome, and I loved seeing them. And thus concludes my national park travels for 2023 at the end of September. I did some sporadic hiking at Congaree throughout the year since it's my hometown park and it's very accessible to me, but I was ramping up my marathon training after I got back from California, so my park travels kind of took a back seat for the rest of the year while I endured so much pain. But the docket is shaping up to be another full one for 2024. I will keep you posted on these travels, and I will hopefully be bringing you plenty of stories from them. Again, leave any questions you may have either about my national park adventures or other park adventures in the comments, and I will get back to you. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.